So I thought this would be a good time to write a book about him. I published 2, in fact, this summer. Now, one rumor has it, up in Anderson County, South Carolina, they'll fight you about this. They say that Abraham Lincoln's real father was John C. Calhoun. That he was a young lawyer in Abbeville, and that he would frequently had to travel up to Walhalla on legal business, and that he would generally spend the night at this townhouse in Anderson. And there was a girl there named Nancy Hanks, a very handsome young woman who worked there. And as she and Calhoun had a relationship, she became pregnant. And the baby, of course, was Abraham Lincoln. Fortunately for Calhoun, there was a cattle driver in town from Kentucky named Thomas Lincoln. And Calhoun paid Thomas Lincoln $500 to take Nancy back to Kentucky with him. And he did, and married her. That's one of the stories. Abraham's mother died when he was 12 years old. And this is his stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln. She went to great pains to teach Abraham to read, or introduce him to people who could teach him to read. And he told her once, he said, "My best friend is any man who will loan me a book." And he was reading the classics when he was 12 years old, very complex books. Not only was he reading them, but he could quote them at length. They opposed each other for about every political position that came open. And in fact, Douglas was also dating Mary Todd at the same time Lincoln was. And somebody asked her, "Which one are you going to marry?" And she said, "The one who has the best chance of being elected president." And she meant it. And here's Lincoln and Douglas in one of their 7 debates. They debated all over Illinois. And it's been said that these were probably the greatest debates in the history of the United States. They both were excellent speakers. Douglas always talked on slavery. And is it legal or illegal? And Lincoln turned the tables on him. He argued about slavery, but not is it legal or illegal, but is it right or wrong? So he asked Mary Todd to marry him. They were to have gotten married on January the 1st, 1842. Well, everybody was delighted. And Elizabeth baked all these cakes, made all these refreshments. Ninian went out and invited everybody who was anybody in Illinois to attend the wedding at their home there in Springfield. And of course, on January the 1st, everybody showed up. There was Mary Todd wearing a beautiful white dress that her sister had bought for her. 2 o'clock came, everybody was there except Abraham Lincoln. 2:30 came, no Lincoln. 3 o'clock came, no Lincoln. So he didn't show up for the wedding. So they had nothing to do then but make excuses to all the guests and whatnot. Mary Todd, of course, was beside herself, hysterical. But at any rate, Lincoln didn't contact her again for several months. But then they got back together, thanks to a mutual friend. So again, they scheduled the wedding. Same thing, bake cakes, invite everybody. And again, Lincoln didn't show up. Stood up at the altar twice now. Well, Ninian was pretty furious about all this, and he said, "Is there something funny about that guy?" He said, "I can remember when a man would have been horsewhipped for doing less than he's done." At any rate, they finally got back together and got married. Now, Lincoln was elected president on November the 4th, 1860. And this is their house the next day after he'd been elected president. You can see Lincoln standing next to the door there downstairs. He's about a head taller than anybody else. And at that time, by the way, he was clean shaven. And that's their son, their oldest son, Robert. Robert went to Harvard. And he and his father never hit it off very well. Lincoln never felt comfortable in Robert's presence because Robert loved to boast about his fine education. And of course, Lincoln had no education. It was one thing he was very sensitive about, the fact that he'd never been to school. He was self-taught. He learned everything himself. And so Lincoln was always sort of relieved when Robert went back to school and left home. On December the 20th, 1860, The South Carolina Secession Convention met in Charleston at Secession Hall to decide what to do now that Abraham Lincoln had been elected president. And this is a very rare photograph here. That's Secession Hall. And at the moment this photograph was taken, the convention was meeting to decide just what steps to take. You can see the Christmas decorations. It's December the 20th. They got Christmas decorations up. And of course that afternoon the convention came out and announced that they had voted to secede from the Union. Representatives met in Montgomery, Alabama. That was the first capital of the Confederacy. They met at the State House down there, and they elected Jefferson Davis as president of the Confederacy. Davis's wife, by the way, Verena Howell, very beautiful woman, she opposed both secession and slavery, and she made no secret of it, much to his chagrin.
Was she originally from the South?
I'm sorry, what?
Was she originally from the South?
Yeah, she was from Alabama, in fact, yes, sir. Harriet Beecher Stowe. When Abraham Lincoln was president, he met her, and he said, "So you're the lady who started the Civil War." And Uncle Tom's Cabin was the best-selling novel of the 19th century. There's Colonel George Custer. He was a Union cavalry officer. And the fellow sitting on his right there is a Confederate cavalry officer. They'd been classmates at West Point before the war. And the Confederate was exchanged a week later, but he later wrote that Custer treated him more as a welcome guest than as a prisoner of war. They were still, those relationships that began before the war, especially at West Point, they never died.
What concessions did Lincoln try to make with the South?
To the South?
Yeah.
No Reconstruction. The South would be welcomed back into the Union with all her constitutional rights restored, just as though she'd never been away. We could even send back the same politicians who had seceded 4 years earlier. I mean, it's just the way he was. He always made friends of enemies, or trying to. And he thought that was the right thing to do, you know. And so, I really applaud him for reaching out.
What's your take on the second inaugural?
On what?
On this Lincoln's second inaugural. Was he, do you think he was trying to say in that the South was actually punished for all they had done, or do you read it some other way?
His second inaugural?
Second inaugural.
No, I think I take that as another reaching out, almost like a secret message to the South, like, you guys come on back, all is forgiven, you know, no hard feelings. That's the way I take it.